Hi, welcome to Lighthouse Living Room, and for the next few minutes, I will be your host. This is Pastor Mark at the Lighthouse in Oakview, California. I hope to find you doing well, and I guess in all ways, you're here to learn something about what the Word says. I hope you enjoyed last week with Steve-O. He kind of draws the life out of you. You're not quite sure where it's going to end up, but we had some fun. Tonight, I want to talk to you about the I ams of Christ, or the I-am of the Bible. Basically, we're going to be talking about mostly out of the book of John, actually, all of John except for one time in Acts. We won't get all of them tonight, but we're going to jump on a couple of them. I think it's an interesting concept, and the fact that, especially when I'm going to be talking about tonight, that I am the light of the world. We're going to discuss that simply because of the fact that it was brought up and brought to my attention something that my daughter Andrea had learned for the first time in regards to why he said that and where he said that and how that was taken in. Anyway, to make a long story short, we want to start in chapter 8 of the book of John. So if you've got something to drink next to you and you've got your notepad and time, I hope that this will help you to understand a little bit better the person of Jesus. And of course, in the book of John, there's no better place to find out about him than there. So we're going to be taking a look at the light of the world, and that's in chapter 8. But we're going to start chapter 8, verse 1, and we're going to read 1 through 11, and then we're going to discuss it a little bit. This is a very famous, I should say, infamous more than famous situation in which Jesus was confronted by the Pharisees and the scribes, and they did something very interesting, is that they caught a woman in adultery in the very act. Well, that ought to tell you a couple of things. One, why were they that close to the situation, number one, and why were they even in the same room? I find it very interesting that these guys seem to think that there is not a problem with that. They used to call that stalking or eavesdropping or peeping Tom or peeping Pharisee. I'm not quite sure what that is, but I'm just saying it's very interesting that this has took place. But so let's read it, and then I'm going to give you some commentary in regards to it, simply because of the fact that we can. And I think it's quite interesting as it leads up to the next question that Jesus brings to the people in this crowd that he was at. So where was he? What was he doing? Why is this important? Because this is kind of the week, if you will, before he is crucified. And it's kind of talking to an issue that a lot of people don't want to talk about. It's so obvious that it's right there in front of your face. But Jesus went to the Mount of Olives early in the morning or at dawn. He came back into the temple court, and I'm sorry, so that you understand, I'm reading this from the Amplified. You can't see the back of my Bible, and it's kind of cool. There's a nice little stand that the girls got me, so I'm going to utilize it the best I can, it's simply because it's so much easier to read this way. And then it's taken verse 2, we're at verse 3. And when the scribes and Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in adultery, they made her stand in the middle of the court and put a case before him. Teacher, they said, this woman has been caught in, look what it says in the Amplified, the very act of adultery. Okay, well, let me ask you a question. What do you think that is? Well, you can probably make up your mind. The question is, what in the world were they doing there? I just saying. And then this woman had been caught in the very act of adultery. Verse 5 says that now Moses in the law commanded us that such, or women, offenders, shall be stoned to death. But what do you say to do with her, and what is your sentence? You can find that information in regards to stoning someone who has been caught in adultery or someone who is with someone else's husband, if you will, or someone that basically, in this case, is just bad news. In Deuteronomy chapter 22, verses 22 through 24. And basically what they did is they stoned them. Now, and a lot of people don't understand the concept here. Stoning was a very, how can I say, very public. Everybody contributed. Everybody was part of that. And I'm setting the stage because of what happens here in a moment is very important to understand what's going on. Many people believe that stoning is somebody stood against a wall and then they threw stones on them and throw stones at them, basically to kill them. Well, stoning as in first century times would be where you would be standing on a ledge above an area. They would take the victim or the person who has been judged that needs to be stoned to the bottom of this ravine, maybe 10 yards or so downwind, if you will, or lower than where they're at. And then people would come to the edge and they would take stones, and I'm not talking about stones in your hand where you just toss them and think that that's pretty cool, but they would take stones that weighed 5 or 10 pounds and they would lob them down there on the person until, this will blow your mind, until that person was completely covered with stones. In other words, dead. And it's a very interesting problem here because Jesus is in the middle of a room in the temple where these people drug this woman in. Many people are there. Now remember that there's no women there. It's all men because in the temple it was segregated. So men were in this room as a general rule. And these scribes and Pharisees who brought this woman to Jesus drug her in, probably kicking and screaming. Just saying. And so this is all going on. So verse 6, he says, Then they said to try to test him, hoping that they might find a charge on which to accuse him. But Jesus stooped down and he wrote on the ground with his finger. He wrote on the ground with his finger. Now, what's interesting is that you've got to get a mental picture here that was probably sand or dirt on the floor. So in other words, he could make an image with his finger. And so he was either doing ancient Hebrew or he was doing something, basically talking or having a conversation with this woman. Now, however, when they persisted with their question, he raised himself up. So he was stooping down. He was almost fanning on the ground, doing what he was doing. Think about that for a moment. Lady still standing there. How she was dressed, who knows? Probably barely, I'm just saying. Caught in the very act of, which would mean that she's probably not clothed, or she has very little clothes on. So there was quite how can I say, quite a deal going on. It was getting, I mean, maybe in today's, that would be age, it would be kind of normal, but this was not normal. I'll give you an example, for instance. In the prodigal son situation, you remember the prodigal son where the father ran after the boy that was on the edge of town. He ran after him. He said that he grabbed his robe and pulled it up over his ankles. Now, that was totally forbidden in Jewish law. Totally, absolutely, totally forbidden. You did not do that. So if you can imagine in your mind, the father, and the second thing that was interesting about the prodigal situation, the father running after the son, even though his ankles were showing, he was also running. There's only two reasons to run inside the city limits, if you will, of Jerusalem or any town per se, Oakview or whatever, is that you've stolen something and you're running for your life. Two, there's a fire. That's it. Totally. So if you can imagine this, we see a scantily clad woman amongst a bunch of men, old and younger, because we'll dispense with the familiarities. And so somebody under 12, because age of accountability was 12. So when they speak of people who are younger, would probably be under the age of 12. And so here they are in the temple. They're all here listening to what Jesus has to say. Scribes come in, drag this woman that's barely clothed, or at least very scantily clothed, and there she is for everybody to see. And this is what they're saying. So in verse 7, they said, And when they persisted with their question, he raised himself up and said, Let him who is without sin among you be the first to throw a stone at her. So this brings us to another problem. So they would have had to take her to the place in which they would stone people. And that means that the whole crowd would go, and they would all gather rocks on the way, or stones, if you will. And this process would begin. But now what's interesting about this is that Jesus says, those of you without sin, and I would say that the scribes and the Pharisees were basically in sin because they grabbed a woman who's basically naked out of a room in which she was having relations with another man, with a man, preferably. My point that I'm making here is that where's the man? Why was he not drug in front of? Because Deuteronomy also says that he should have been dealt with. The trouble is, you don't hear anything about that, do you? It's very interesting. And so he raised himself up and he says, those of you without sin, throw the first stone at her. Then he bent down back to what he was doing. He was writing in the ground. And the stories that goes with this piece of scripture is that he was telling her story in Hebrew or in cryptograph or Aramaic or whatever, but he was writing it on the ground so that she could see it. The people that were in the room could not, because he was down low to the ground, writing in a way that I would assume no one else would know. Now, I don't know about you, but this is pretty interesting. Now, however, they persisted. Now, he bent down and went writing on the ground with his finger. They listened to him, and then they began going out. Conscience-stricken, I love the Amplified for this reason, one by one, from the oldest down to the last one of them, until Jesus was left alone with a woman standing there before him in the center of the court. Center of the court. So now we know that he was actually outside of the temple, not in a room, but he was in the court. So this is a gathering place for men. So women are actually forbidden to be there. But yet the scribes and the Pharisees decided it'd be a good idea to drag a woman, kicking and screaming, scantily clad, and disrespect the temple, disrespect the place of worship by dragging a woman caught in adultery, and of which these two or three or four or six or how many of it was, probably three, because you have to have three voices to condemn someone. You have to have three individuals testify to condemn in Jewish law. You can't do it with one, can't do it with two. You've got to have three. So that at least three of them showed up on the scene and accused Jesus or tried to get him to do something that he shouldn't have done. Now, all of a sudden, when Jesus raised himself up and he said to her, "Woman, where are your accusers?" Even the ones that condemned him had to leave because they were not without sin because of what they did. Going into this room and doing what they did was sinful act on their part because it was none of their frickin' business. But they decided to make it their business because they wanted to entrap Jesus. And what happens when you try to entrap someone? Usually the trap is sprung on you. We find that true in just what's happening in America today, especially in regards to this presidential election that's going on. Just saying, some very interesting things. And when he bent down, he went and writing on the ground with his fingers, and they listened to him, and they left. And when he raised up, he says, "Where is your accusers? Has no man condemned you?" He asked the question. She answered, said, "No one, Lord." And Jesus said, "I do not condemn you either. Go on your way, and from now on, sin no more." Now, the biggest question that we have about this little section or 11 verses is, what did he write on the ground? What did he say to her? Did he deal with her conscience, deal with her sin? Because first of all, she was doing something with someone that she knows she shouldn't have been with, whether she was doing it for money or she was doing it for other reasons, or just basically she was a loose cannon in the city. But the thing is that there's a lot of stuff going on here, a lot of fingers pointing back at the ones that were accusing her. But Jesus said something very interesting. He said, I will not accuse you or condemn you. And he said, but go on your way and sin no more. The question in all of our lives is the question that he poses. He said, knowing that we have done something stupid, knowing that we've been caught, and knowing that we have escaped punishment does not mean that we can continue doing what we do, right? So this is one of the things that I find very fascinating, especially when we're dealing with Jesus and how he dealt with people. He was always consistent. He was always the same. He never changed. Which brings us tonight to the story that I want to talk about, and I think is very fascinating in regards to its presentation, the I ams of Jesus or of the Christ. Now, God revealed himself to Moses in Exodus chapter 3, verse 14, and he said, Moses asked him, because he'd never been confronted with God. He didn't know who God was. He says, who should I say you are? And God, Yahweh, responded, I am. Now, that's an interesting term in the fact that I am is present tense. In other words, I am present. I am real. I am here now. I am with you right now. Eye contact, whatever the case may be. Now, in a lot of ways, we find that this is a really interesting term in the fact that it's not past and it's not future, but it is present tense. I am. Jesus was put to the test here, and we'll read about here in a moment, that I think is very interesting about the concept of what he was saying. I am the light of the world. I am. Present tense. I am. Now, was he glowing at the time? Did he have a candle in his hand? And I say candle because I would say flashlight in today's day, but that's not, they didn't have those. Have a lantern? Did he have like a genie's lamp where the light on the end of the spout is where light came from? None of that is relevant at this point. He says, I am. In other words, him personally. He is the light of the world. Now, it's kind of interesting that God's continuous presence through the ages and succeeding generations, when God said, I am, it means he was always a been. And I've mentioned this in the past, so I'll just refer to it again. When we're talking about Yahweh, we're talking about something or an entity, a deity, if you will, that has no beginning and no end. In other words, I am mean I have always been. I was not conjured up, I was not created, I've always been. And I will always be. Those two things are eternal. That's what they call that. That's an eternal timeline. In other words, no beginning, no end. In the middle of that, he says, I am. In other words, in the presence of him, he is here. I know this sounds redundant, but the point is what I'm trying to make here is what Jesus is going to do here in a moment brings us to a very interesting problem. Now, in John 8:58, the end of this chapter, it says something very interesting. It says, Jesus said to them, truly I tell you, before Abraham was, I am. In other words, he also is eternal. In other words, no beginning, no end. He is also, in present tense, I am. So when he was talking about his Father, he was speaking of the mere image, him being Jesus, of his dad. Papa God, Yahweh, whatever you want to call that deity, the Holy One, the name above all names, the unspeakable name, whatever that case may be, is that is who he is. I am. So he equates himself with his Father in equality. In other words, you see him, you see me. You see me, you see him. The thing is that no one has seen God and lived according to Scripture. But the point is that many have seen parts of God, the hind parts, the back, etc. And in that alone changed the character of the individual who saw that. So Jesus saying this is very, 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 very amazing. Now, he reveals 7 I am statements in the book of John. 7. We're going to look at the first one, the light of the world. John chapter 8, verse 12. Let's go. Once more, Jesus addressed the crowd, and he said, I am the light of the world. He who follows me will not be walking in the dark, but will have the light, which is life. Whereupon the Pharisees told him, you are testifying on your own behalf. Your testimony is not valid and is worthless. Jesus answered, even if I do testify on my own behalf, my testimony is true and reliable and valid, for I know where I have come from and where I am going, but you do not know where I come from or where I am going. Verse 15, you set yourself up to be judge according to the flesh, by which you see. You condemn by external human standards. I do not set myself up to be judge or condemn or sentence anyone. This is a reference to what we just read that happened just immediately before Jesus said, I am the light of the world. Yet even if I do judge, my judgment is true. My decision is right, for I'm not alone in making it, but there are 2 of us. Here's where he's referring to his Father, in which they're the same. And he says, I and the Father who sent me. In your own law, it is written that the testimony evidence of 2 persons is reliable and valid. Deuteronomy 19, verse 15. I am one of the 2, bearing testimony concerning myself and my Father who sent me. He also testifies about me. Then he said to him, where is this Father of yours? Jesus answered, you know my Father as little as you know me. You know my Father as little as you know me. If you knew me, you would know my Father also. So he just threw this back in their face. In other words, you don't recognize me. The Jews did not recognize Jesus for who he was. They recognized Jesus as a threat to their community. They had a pretty good gig going. They had all the money that they wanted. They could do anything they wanted. They were in, as Jesus called them, they were basically people in a sack with dead bones in them, basically. He said, you know what, your religion is worthless. He said that. Now, then he said, where's your Father, the Father of yours? Jesus answered, verse 19, you know my Father as little as you know me. For if you knew me, you would know my Father also. Verse 20, Jesus said these things in the treasury while he was teaching in the temple court. But no one ventured to arrest him because his hour had not come. In other words, to them, this was blasphemy. You're in the temple court. You're here. This is our domain, the Pharisees and Sadducees and the scribes. This is their domain. And yet they did not even try to arrest him. Now, verse 21. Therefore he said it again to them, I am going away, and you will be looking for me, and you will die under the curse of your sin. Where I am going, it is not possible for you to come. So what was he basically saying? He said, you're not going to make it to heaven, buddy. You're not going to go there because of what you've been doing. At this, the Jews began asking among themselves, will he kill himself? Is that what he says? Where I am going, it is not possible for you to come? He said to them, you are from below. I am from above. You are of this world, of not earthly order. I am not of this world. And that is why I told you that you will die under the curse of your sins. For if you do not believe that I am he whom I claim to be, if you do not adhere to, trust in, and rely on me, you will die in your sins. Then they said to him, who are you anyway? Jesus replied, why do you even speak? Why do I even speak to you? I'm exactly what I have been telling you from the first. I have much to say about you and the judge and condemn. But he who sent me is true, reliable, and I tell the world only the things that I have heard from him. In other words, I only talk about what God, the Father, has told me. I don't tell you about anything else. So Jesus added, when you have lifted up the Son of Man, basically he's saying, when you have lifted me up on the cross, you will realize, know, and understand that I am he whom you look, and do nothing of myself on my own, according or on my own authority, but as I say exactly what my Father has taught me. In other words, I'm only repeating what I know. I'm only repeating what God, Yahweh, the Most High, has told me. My Father has told me. And he who sent me is ever with me. My Father has not left me alone, for I always do what pleases him. As he said these things, many believed on him and trusted, relied on, and adhered to him. So Jesus said to those Jews who had believed in him, if you abide in my word, hold fast to my teachings, and live according with them, you are truly my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. They answered him, and we are Abraham's offspring, descendants, and have never been in bondage to anybody. What do you mean by saying that you will be set free? And so we're going to talk about that in a minute, but I want to take you back to the term, or to the sentence, or to the statement. I am the light of the world. Now, at this particular time in the temple was the time of Passover, or a time when they would actually come together and they would begin to worship and they would begin to celebrate Passover. Now, what's interesting about this is very, very, very interesting that inside of the tabernacle, inside of the place, the most holy place in these areas, there were 4 pillars that were set up. In the pillars were on the top of these pillars that were taller than a man. I can't remember how tall they are exactly. They had a light on them, 4 of these. What it represented at this point in time, according to Scripture and according to the law, was the pillar of light, or basically the cloud that covered the people of Israel in the Sinai during the 40 years of marching around Sinai before they went into the Promised Land. It represented the light that God gave to light the camp at nighttime. This is what Jesus was actually referring to when he said, I am that light. I am the light of the world. I am that person in present tense. I am here to share with you the light that only comes to me. And I love this one part where he was just saying, he said, he who follows me will not be walking in the dark, but will have the light, which is life. Verse 12. That is the first verse that we looked at tonight. Isn't that fascinating? I think it's just, to me, that's totally fascinating. And this is what Andrea came to me last night, and she said, Dad, I just figured this out. It just makes so perfect sense what it was Jesus doing. Everything that Jesus did, every time that he would refer to himself in the present tense, and that is, I am the light of the world, it was referring back to something that was revered or held holy in the sight of the Jewish people. And here in the temple, at this moment in time, were lights that were set on these pillars to represent the pillar, if you will, of light that lit the camp and kept everyone safe during the nighttime. Because remember, they were in the wilderness. And in the wilderness, this is really hard to comprehend, the wilderness was considered the territory of the dark one, Satan, the enemy's camp. Everything in the wilderness was the enemy's. Only where the light was shining were you safe. When the light was gone, the shadow began to take over the light, is what they called the wildernesses, where Azrael would reside. In other words, that would be the demon, if you will, of the desert, or the demon of the wilderness. We're going to be talking about this Sunday. I'm going to be talking about the gates of hell, and this is fascinating only in the fact that many people don't understand what the gates of hell are all about, and that there was a real place in Capernaum, a real place in which they considered the gates of hell, or the entrance, if you will, to the underworld, the entrance to what was dark, or what we would call Sheol, which is hell. Fascinating story. Here we find Jesus talking to these people and giving them some interesting things to think about, because now he's starting to talk like, my Father is the one that sent me. Now, we are now on verse 34. I want to share with you, he's talking about, he said, the truth shall make you free, or this truth will set you free. And it goes on in verse 34 to talk about this very thing in a little different way. And he said, most solemnly I tell you, whoever commits and practices sin is a slave of sin. Now a slave does not remain in the household permanently forever. The son of the house does remain forever. So if the Son liberates you or makes you free men, then you are really and unquestionably free. In other words, the truth shall set you free. Yes, I know that you are Abraham's offspring, yet you plan to kill me. He says it straight up. I mean, it's not bad enough that they're trying to kill him, trying to figure out ways to entrap him, trying to figure out ways to cause him to, if you will, sin. Here he's just saying, he said, yet you plan to kill me, because my word has no entrance or makes no progress, does not find any place in you. And he says, I tell the things of which I have seen and learned of my Father's side, and your actions also reflect that you have heard and learned from your father. Now, who's their father? Oh, well, guess what? They restored Abraham as our father, Jesus said. If you were truly Abraham's children, then you would do the works of Abraham. Follow his example, do as Abraham did. But now instead you are wanting and seeking to kill me, a man who has told you the truth, which I have heard from God. This is not the way Abraham acted. And you're doing the works of your own father. Look at it carefully. This is where he takes and throws a curve at them. Now watch. He says to them, we are not illegitimate children and born out of fornication, but we have one Father, even God. Now, isn't it interesting he's talking about fornication? What is he talking about? Again, referring to the first part of verses 1 through 11 in chapter 8, talking about the woman who was brought in, caught in the very act of adultery. Now, and he says, you're going to do the works of your own father. And he said to him, we are not illegitimate children and born out of fornication. We have one Father, even God. Jesus said to them, if God were your Father, you would love me and respect me and welcome me gladly, for I came forth from God out of his very presence. I did not even come on my own authority or in my own accord as self-appointed, but he sent me. Why do you misunderstand what I say? It is because you are unable to hear what I am saying. You cannot bear to listen to my message. Your ears are shut to my teaching. You and your father, here it is. This is when he slaps him in the mouth. He says, you and your father, the devil, and that it is your will to practice the lust and gratify the desires which are characteristic of your father. He was a murderer from the beginning and does not stand in the truth, because there is no truth in him. When he speaks a falsehood, he speaks what is natural to him, for he is a liar himself and a father of lies. And all of that is false. All of what he does is false. But because I speak the truth, you do not believe me. Do not trust me. Do not rely on me. Do not adhere to me. Who of you convicts me of wrongdoing or finds me guilty of sin? Then if I speak the truth, why do you not believe me? Trust me, rely on me, and adhere to me. Whoever is of God listens to God. Those who belong to God hear the words of God. This is the reason that you do not listen to those words to me, because you do not belong to God and are not God or in harmony with him. The Jews answered him, he says, are we not right when we say that you are a Samaritan, and that you have a demon that you have under the power of an evil spirit? Jesus answered, I am not possessed by a demon. On the contrary, I honor and reverence my Father, and you dishonor, despise, vilify, and scorn me. However, I am not in search of honor for myself. I do not seek, and I am not aiming for my own glory. There is one who looks after that. He seeks my glory, and he is the judge. I assure you, most solemnly I tell you that if anyone observes my teachings, lives in accordance with my message, keeps my word, he will by no means ever see or experience death. Wow, this threw them for a loop. Look what he says. Look what it says. The Jews said to him, now we know that you are under the power of a demon. You're insane. Abraham died, and also the prophets. Yet you say, if a man keeps my word, he will never taste of death into all eternity. Are you greater than our father Abraham? He died, and all the prophets died. Who are you to make yourself out to be? And Jesus answered, if I were to glorify myself, magnify, praise, and honor myself, I would have no real glory, for my glory would be nothing and worthless. My honor must come to me from my Father. It is my Father who glorifies me, who extols me, magnifies, praises me, of whom you say that he is your God. Yet you do not know him, you don't recognize him, and are not acquainted with him, but I know him. If you should say, I do not know him, it would be a liar like you. But I know him and keep his word, obey his teachings, and faithful to his message. Your father Abraham was extremely happy at the hope, at prospect of seeing my day, my incarnation. And he did it and was delighted. This is Hebrew chapter 11, verse 13. Then the Jews said to him, you are not yet 50 years old, and you have seen Abraham? Oh man, these people are freaking out. Then the Jews said to him, you have yet 50 years old, and have you seen Abraham? Jesus replied, I assure you most solemnly, I tell you, before Abraham was born, I am. That's Exodus 3, verse 14. So they took up stones to throw at him, but Jesus, by mixing with the crowd, concealed himself and went out of the temple enclosure. Now, I want to say all of this and come to the conclusion a little early tonight. I think it's very interesting in Jesus' case that it's very hard for people to understand the nature of who Jesus is in an individual. Now, what I mean by that is that many of us claim to be followers of Christ, imagers of God. My question to you is that, does everybody see that, or is it only on occasion, or is it only on Sundays, or is it only on a Wednesday night, or is it only at certain moments? Or do you serve him continually so that they can see the God that you image all of the time? I think it's pretty evident that life creates for us a series of opportunities or a series of failures. And I think that we many times don't take following Jesus as seriously as we should. Now, why do I say that? It's pretty obvious that's what's going on right now in the world, especially the chaotic things that we see happening, that people see people of faith and they go through a litany of things. I was just talking to a guy today, a guy that used to attend here at the Lighthouse many years ago. And he said something to me that was quite interesting. I'm doing a job for this person, and in doing this job, conversation came up about an individual that we know, acquaintance. And in talking to him, he said he remembered a time when a pastor, and I'm loose term, a pastor was in business doing something, and that assured him that this, that, and the other thing about something that was going to happen. And he found out, and this is what his words, he said, and this pastor stiffed me and left me holding the bag, or basically the bill. I find that ironically, one of the things that we don't understand, and I will use myself as an example. Pastors have to have a higher standard than everyone else. Why? Is because of the reason of what I'm just speaking about right now. Many people see a pastor and they automatically think one of two things. He's above reproach, he does what he says, and there's truth in him. Or the opposite, like in this case, yeah, I don't deal with Christians, especially pastors, because they kind of put it to me. They took advantage of me. And you know the trouble is that I hear that a lot more than I hear they're above reproach. I have personally taken it on in my own life to make sure that whatever happens, no matter what, that there is never a time where a person can turn that around and use that against God to have the excuse of not serving him because people have disappointed them. What I'm saying to you tonight, and what I'm saying, and I'm trying to say to you right now, when Jesus confronted the Pharisees and Sadducees with the truth, they could not accept the truth. And the reason why they couldn't accept the truth is because that narrative changed what they were doing. In other words, they had a pretty good gig going on. They actually got away with a lot of stuff. And in getting away with it, pretty soon it became normal. In other words, taking a bribe or doing things that benefit you, make you look good, sometimes is the way life makes things turn out. But that is not what the Word says. He said, if you know the truth will set you free. I believe very strongly, and I cannot say this enough, so many people today have a different idea about people of faith and people in the world. I've said it many times, and a lot of people look at me like I'm a little crazy, but I said it like this, is that out of every 10 people that claim to be Christians that I have worked for, maybe only 30%, that would be 3 out of 10, actually acted like a believer. In the world, I find it very interesting, and I say in the world, people who are not claimed to be believers, but believe in fairness, morally sound, and got their act together in a lot of other ways, financially in particular. When I work for them, there's never a question. I mean, it's fascinating. But those that are people of faith, at least claim to be, question everything. Because somehow we have come to the place where we don't have a sense, if you will, of what it means to have, integrity, I guess would be the term. So I'm throwing this out to you that are listening tonight, and I hope you enjoyed this. I think this is really, for me, I enjoy talking about this stuff because it's just, to me, it's history. There's so much cool things that are in there, and I am is a present tense of who he is, Jesus being in the presence with us all of the time. And I guess the question would be, is the things that you do and the things that you are supposed to do, are you doing them? And if you are, then praise God and bless you, because God will bless you for that. But on the other hand, are you also skeptical of those that call themselves Christians because of the reputation of all of these ones, the 30 or 40 or 50 or 60% that seem to not live up to what a Christian should look like? And I think in the world today, we need to be honest about our integrity, honest about our ability to share things. And sometimes we need to be truthful with each other. And being truthful sometimes is not, how can I say, easy. Sometimes it's easier to turn around and walk away. Sometimes it's just easier not to say anything. But then there are times that you should say something. You need to say something, because people expect that. And I think that in today's economy, in today's world, in today's understanding and culture, is that Jesus is still, I believe, very much the Son of the living God. And that people of faith need to act like people of faith, not so close to the world that one foot is in and the other foot is out. not so much that we're straddling the fence, but the fact is, call the shots what they are. I am not going to say that this is okay if I know that the Bible tells me that it's not okay. I mean, it's just like this transgender stuff. Everybody says, oh, don't start that. Well, the problem is that it's damaging and hurting a lot of people. So you cannot allow that to color what the Word says. So the truth will set you free. The truth will set people on a path to good things. But having one foot in and one foot out is why the Sadducees and Pharisees got into so much trouble, why they were so corrupt. Because it was all about money. It was all about selling the gospel. Not gospel, but the religion, because I don't believe that you can sell the gospel. If you do that, I think you're just as bad as anybody else that's out there trying to sell you a hair grow product or a vitamin or that doesn't work or something else. My point is that all that we do should be truthful. It should be always lifting up the individual, always edifying, always making Jesus first, a second, third, fourth, or fifth. So all of that being said, I'm not surprised that many people don't understand this concept. Jesus had a fight on his hands. He was dealing with people in the present day and the spiritual realm that people don't understand is that he was fighting darkness at the same time he was fighting darkness in the people that were supposed to be leading the people of God. And the trouble is they were as corrupt as the people that the entities that were trying to destroy him secretly and under the gun. So saying all of that tonight is that I think this is one of the things, the I ams of Christ. Let me give you a few more. I am the bread of life, chapter 6 of John. I am the light of the world, chapter 8 of John. I am the gate, chapter 10 of John. I am the good shepherd, chapter 10 of John. I am the resurrection and life, John chapter 11. I am the way, the truth, and the life, John 14. I am the vine, John 15. Next week, we're going to take a look at another one of the 7 that I just mentioned, and we're going to dissect it like we did tonight. I think it's very interesting, at least for me, is that it's pretty cool when we understand that if we walk in him and he walks with his Father and teaches me what his Father has taught him, we've got a pretty safe road to hoe. And I believe that we can change the entire economy of God in any one place, here at the Lighthouse and everywhere else. And believe me, God is truly, truly an entity of truth that brings with us so many good things. And so with that said, may the Lord bless you, may the Lord keep you, may his light shine upon you, and wherever you go, leave a blessing. Don't even think for a moment that you can get away with it. Don't even think about it. Tell the truth all the time. All the time. Doesn't matter what it is. But don't do yourself a disservice by thinking telling the truth is also being judgmental and telling somebody the truth that's going to hurt them. Sometimes it's just better to ignore, deflect, and leave it alone. That's just a word from me. Love you. I hope everything's going well for you. I pray for all of those that have been ill and not doing well, and I'm praying to see all of you this Easter, and I'm really looking forward to just a great time. Journey to the Cross, we'll be talking about the gates of hell this next week. So we'll see you then. May the Lord bless you again. We'll see you next Wednesday. Same time, same bat channel. See you then.